Hey guys, Nick from Stoltec Moto here. Just want to share a couple thoughts on our brand new 2017 Yamaha FZ-10. Highly anticipated, at least on this end. And we've had a lot of questions and comments wondering how we like the bike, how it compares to the other Yamahas in the FZ lineup, especially the FZ-09 and to a certain extent the FZ-7 and the XSR 900. So we'll give you a couple minutes here just to get an overview as to what our thoughts are and some of the highs that might not have been transpired through the other reviews that you find online. So we picked this up a couple days ago. We got a couple miles on the bike at this point. Did about 285 on the past couple days trying to break in the engine. Styling wise, I won't touch on here. I know it's a very personal subject. I will say that to my eyes it looks a lot better in person than I originally thought. When I first saw the bike released from Yamaha, I was a bit confused, and I honestly thought that the designers were playing tricks on us. Wasn't sure that this was their final product. I shouldn't have doubted. It looks pretty good. It looks smaller in person. It's a little bit more svelte. Things appear to be more cohesive in person, but the fit and finish is great. We originally purchased the Armor Gray with the high-vis wheels. Unfortunately, there was a delay on that. Could not get it in time, but honestly, seeing the color in person we have here is pretty good. We're happy with it. And in reality, I'm not great with washing my bike, so this is probably a better wheel color for me here, since this is my personal bike that we'll be using for R&D purposes. But that said, how does it feel? Well, it feels great. You know, honestly, Yamaha did a great job. The FZ-9 was a fantastic bike. Had a couple problems, as we're all aware. Early fuel injection quirks, inadequate suspension. All in all, a great bike for the money, and certainly very fixable. An awful lot of fun once it's done. But there were some little things that had to be adjusted. This bike clearly is more well finished. It's based on the R1, which is fantastic, but it costs an awful lot more. You're talking an extra $4,000 to $5,000 depending on how much you're paying for each bike. That's quite a lot of money. You could put a lot of upgrades into your FZ-09. You're never going to get the horsepower out of it, not that that matters for most riders. 115 on the FZ-09 is more than adequate. So 160 here is certainly more than adequate. It's excessive. But what's interesting is that it never feels excessive. I would say that the FZ-9 is a little bit rowdier down low. It wants to wheelie all the time. Has a very light flywheel effect, and you know, it's just very snappy. Kind of the best analogy that I can use between these two bikes. This clearly makes more power. But in terms of its power delivery, it kind of feels like a 4-stroke dirt bike, whereas the FZ-9 feels more like a 2-stroke. You know, this is definitely easier to ride. Makes an awful lot of power. Pulls like the proverbial freight train. The engine sound is fantastic, which I'm not going to start here for you guys. You could find a lot of videos online for it. But even with the stock muffler, although most of that stuff in the middle is pretty hideous, it works really well. It sounds great. Has kind of a muted MotoGP bike. Obviously, if you've heard the R1 in the past, you know what you're getting in for. It sounds great. It's definitely a bit subdued, but you know, it's a very mature sound. The engine so far, no problems, clearly. It is pretty much brand new. Really not much else to say on it. Honestly, it's a fantastic engine. It's very flexible. Pulls very cleanly from around 2,000 RPM up to redline. I will say that we have 3 drive modes here. We have standard mode right now. That's your basic mode. Next mode is A mode. Next step in terms of aggressiveness. Followed by B mode. Most aggressive. So that's not the same ordering that they did on the FZ-9, but same kind of effect as the 3 modes on the FZ-9. I personally prefer the standard mode at this point in time. The A and B are definitely fun. They have pretty immediate pickup. It's always manageable. It's not going to get out of hand. But I prefer the standard engine braking when you roll off the throttle. I find that standard is a little bit softer. So that's probably something that we could sort out with an ECU flash, which we'll get into as soon as possible. But that being said, standard seems to be the ticket for me personally. Traction control mode, you have a few options here. Right now it's in traction control mode 1. There's 2, there's 3, and technically you could also turn it off by holding down the mode selector. Power output is definitely reduced when traction is limited. You can feel it intervene, but they work really well. They're pretty non-intrusive, honestly. I've left it in traction mode 1 for the most part, and I've been very happy with it, though I did use modes 2 and 3 when the tires were fresh and everything was brand new. So it works pretty well. We'll see how it goes in the rain and everything and at the racetrack, but it's nice having a little bit extra safety on such a powerful bike. One of the things I'll draw your attention to that I really like is this thing here. I'm not sure if you can get a good view of it. It's very big for a sport bike. There's a lot of stuff going on there. You got your typical headlights here, high beams, low beams, push to flash. They finally put the turn signals back where they belong. The horn is down where it belongs. Unlike the FZ-9 and the FZ-7, the FJ9, they were flip-flopped and you ended up honking at people every time you went to cancel your turn signal. So I'm very happy that they fixed that. Got our cruise control here. Buttons up here, very easy to access. Honestly, with a drive-by-wire bike, there's no reason that we shouldn't have it. So it's definitely nice if you're taking a stretch on the highway to rest your right hand. Other thing I really enjoy, this button right here, the select button. Easy to access. It allows you to toggle through the menu without having to take your hands off the bars. So there's a trip meter. There's 2 of them, obviously. Instantaneous fuel economy, average fuel economy, and odometer. Up here we have the engine coolant temperature and the clock obviously in the upper right hand corner. Got the fuel gauge over there on the right, showing half full right now, which brings me to something else, fuel economy. There's been a lot of discussion about how thirsty this bike will be or won't be. Yamaha published a figure of 30 miles to the gallon. I reset this at the beginning of the last fuel tank about 85 miles ago. You'll see I've averaged 31.9 miles to the gallon. Not great, but I'm also trying to work the bike pretty well to get the rings to seat here. So I'm confident that things will improve over time as the engine loosens up and starts to wear in. First tank was 27, second tank was 30, now we're up to 32. I did change the oil at 100 miles and now running Yamalube 1040 non-synthetic. So over time, the synthetic will obviously help bring back a little bit of that. So fuel economy is not great, but you probably didn't buy this bike for fuel economy. You bought it to have fun. So it'll do that in spades. You're obviously going to be limited by the fuel economy with your range with the 4.5 gallon tank. But I would say that it's real world focused. It'll be done and ready for fuel when you're probably just about ready for a stretch anyway. So probably not a deal breaker to most guys and girls. So that's that. I mean, it works pretty well. It would be nice to get a little more range out of it because honestly, the engine is just so fantastic. It would make a great sports tour. In its current form, it honestly pulls very cleanly on a highway. In 5th and 6th gear, there's no vibration whatsoever. The FZ-09 always had a little bit of a buzziness, especially the right foot peg and the right handlebar. And for somebody like myself who covers the front brake all the time with a finger or two, I always found that the brake levers were very buzzy and my fingers would go numb after some high RPM cruising. Not the case on this bike. It's it's very mild-mannered in that sense. You know, if you've never ridden the cross-plank crank R1 before, I could say that there's this gentle thrum, vibration right off idle. And I guess the vibration is not actually the right word. It's just, it's a subtle feeling similar to a V4. But you know the engine's running. It's not obnoxious. It's just enough to remind you that things are working underneath you. And it kind of disappears after that. You get that wonderful sound that we mentioned before, but it just works really well. So what else here? Well, the brakes. We were just looking down here before. You got the same rotors as the R1, although we have the red rotor carrier, which look great in person, by the way. Same 320 mil. You might be able to see that it's grooved on the end there, around the circumference for a little bit more cooling. More buttons than your standard 300 mil rotor like the FZ-10 so heat transfer should be pretty good back there for those guys going to the racetrack. Calipers are different than the R1. Standard Advic for Yamaha, monoblock, good capability. Rubber lines, which is not atypical for Japanese sport bikes. The R1 does come with stainless steel, so that's another area that they save a little bit of money. Has ABS, as you're probably well aware, and kind of par for the course with the price point. They gave us a conventional cross-pull, cross-pump master cylinder as opposed to the higher spec radial master cylinder. I can say that the brake feel is not up to my standards. It's definitely a bit mushy. It stops with authority, there's no question about it. It'll work. Gotta have a little bit of faith in it. There's a little bit of a disconnected feel, which we're gonna look into. Some better lines, some better pads, and an upgrade to the master cylinder. So, you know, the obvious hope is that that mushiness is not in the ABS unit, but we will see as we progress, and we'll see where that goes. Suspension-wise, I would say that it's actually quite good. I will temper that response by saying that the other FZs are so terrible that this one just shines because it's not so terrible. It is quite composed over smooth roads, turns well, light effort. It's rather intuitive. It's neutral handling once you get it set up for your weight and your damping adjustments, set up for where and how you're riding. Works pretty well. The one caveat that I'll make is that it's a bit harsh. I'm about 195 pounds fully geared up, about 170 to 175 in my underwear, and I find it to be quite harsh. The forks are not that bad right now. The rear shock is definitely the issue. So we've done some playing around with the damping settings, and we're playing with the high and low speed compression, and not having a whole lot of success, but we're not through with it yet, so we'll see how that goes. Naturally, we do a lot of suspension work. It's kind of our forte, so we'll see where this goes. But the suspension, I would say, needs a bit of help for the compliance. Quite good on smooth roads. If you're going to the racetrack, you'll probably be okay with it, unless you're running for points, which I doubt you're doing on an FZ-10. That's besides the point. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes, but it does work much better than any of the other FZ lineups. Up front, we have the standard fork cap for the R1, which is actually a very beautiful fork cap, I'll be honest with you. One of the nicest ones you're going to find on a stock bike. As you can see, they are KYBs, full adjustability, compression, rebound, preload. 43 millimeter forks. We'll be doing a revalve and springs, so we'll have all that available soon, but for right now, this is what it's at. The other thing I'd like to show you in here, at the steering stem, carries over with the aluminum nut and the aluminum steering stem, so saving a little bit of weight. Kind of ironic on a 463 pound bike, but hey, every ounce counts, and that's where it's at. The forks are nice, they look good. Nice black anodized, it blends in well. Kind of wish the triples were not silver. but it is what it is, and there is some other silver on the bike, so it's not that big of a deal. What else here? Chassis wise, very, very, very similar to the R1. Swing arm is nearly identical, a couple very minor changes. It feels good. It turns in easy, as I mentioned. It's very composed. It tracks well. It doesn't have any nervous chatter with mid-corner bumps, doesn't upset the chassis, which is fantastic for the real world. I think with some proper suspenders underneath it, it's going to work fantastic. So that's the good news. The chassis is great. The FZ-10, as good as the bike is, was definitely a little bit limited by some of the high frequency vibrations and oscillations. So that's good that we have a better chassis here. Obviously you're paying for it, it's a more expensive bike, but the point should be made. Up in here you're going to see we have a electronically controlled steering stabilizer, speed sensitive, works very well. You'll find that steering is definitely light and responsive on the street, on back roads. Get another shot up here for you. Standard stuff for a sport bike of this caliber, but it works well. It definitely tightens up on the highway, tracks very nicely. So we'll see how it works on the track with the various speeds that we encounter. If we need to address it, we will, but for right now, we're going to continue with it. That also brings me to something else. Back to the aesthetics. Headlights, you'll notice, look very similar to the R1. LED headlights. Haven't had a chance to get out at night yet, but they're definitely pretty bright. We'll see how they work, but I'm very optimistic. The FZ-10 headlight was pretty damn terrible, in my opinion. So that's a welcome improvement, and we're certainly hopeful. I would say that's the majority of the overview, although I guess I didn't touch on the ergonomics. And the one thing I will mention, it fits me very well. 31-inch inseam, about 5'9". Foot peg to seat is quite good. I find it to be very comfortable. I'd have no problem riding this thing all day long. Don't know how low the foot pegs are yet with respect to the tarmac when it's cranked over, so we'll see if rear sets are truly going to be required like they were on the 09, but time will tell. My only real caveat, or gripe I should say, down in this area, foot pegs. Kind of hard to see here, but the distance from here to here is not that much. So with my size 46 racing boot, my heel is just about smack into the passenger foot peg, so those will be coming off. But otherwise, the seat's not so bad. After 100 miles, it was about 2 hours. I could definitely spend some more time. We'll see if that changes. The reach to the handlebars is pretty decent. If I'm sitting back at the flattest part of the seat here, just before the Kriega bag, little bump there to keep you in place with all that power. It's a bit of a stretch to the bars for me personally, so I tend to ride up on the tank, which is okay. Obviously you compromise a bit of the seat when you slide forward. Handlebars feel great. They could probably stand to be a touch lower, but they're not nearly as high and up center as the FZ-10. So I would say that that's a great improvement. Highway speeds, they don't typically get that parachuting effect that the FZ-10 had. Until you get to some higher speeds, like over 80 miles an hour. So we're going to ride these for now, see how it goes, maybe make some minor changes, but we'll see how that goes. Got the adjustability on the brake lever, which is pretty standard, as you can see there, 5 positions, which is nice. And over here you'll see your bare bones basic budget lever, which is really a shame on a $13,000 bike. The cable actuated unit actually feels really nice. I have no complaints about that, but I do wish that it was adjustable. I'd like to get a little more adjustability out to bring a little bit closer. My size 8 to 8.5 hand could definitely use a little bit closer there. It kind of makes a challenge for smooth downshifting. But that's easily fixable. Not a reason not to buy the bike. Mirrors work very well, same unit as the FZ-10. Once you slide them out, you get a little more beyond your shoulders and elbows. So not perfect, but honestly on a sport bike, they're pretty damn good. They're not buzzy at all. They work pretty good for a stock mirror. Wind blast coming off that front little fairing thing, despite all those crazy looking surfaces and angles, actually works quite well. There's no buffeting on my personal helmet, no droning, no noise. Surprising, but it works very, very well. Don't think that's something that we're going to be changing. Other than that, I'm sure you guys might have another couple questions. We'll be tearing this bike apart shortly, getting into some of the suspension work and the brake work and the typical stuff that we do here. So we're looking forward to this. We're looking forward to working with you guys and hearing your thoughts on it. So if you have any questions, shoot us an email, leave a comment, or give us a ring. You can find all this information on our website, www.stoltecmoto.com, and we obviously try and keep a presence on the web forums. In this case, you can check us out on mt10forum.com, I believe it is. But that's kind of it for now. We'll keep you guys posted as we make some changes and as we get through to this bike onto the racetrack and do some more stuff with it. So anyway, if you had any questions, hope this video answers some of those. We're here to answer whatever questions that we didn't answer today. Have a good night, guys. Ride safe.